Emma had waited for this day her whole life. The living room was filled with the scent of vanilla and the quiet hum of family chatter. Her graduation cap lay on the table beside a neatly decorated cake, white frosting, blue lettering, and her name written perfectly across the top. It wasn't just a cake. It was a symbol of every sleepless night, every exam she fought through, and every time she was told she wouldn't make it. For Emma, this day meant freedom. She had worked her way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, never asking anyone for help, especially her sister Laura. Laura always made her feel small, the way she'd compare their lives, their choices, their successes. While Emma went to school, Laura got married, had a son, and built her own version of happiness. Yet beneath that, there was a layer of quiet competition that never disappeared. Whenever Emma achieved something, Laura would find a way to downplay it, to make it sound like luck instead of effort. But today, Emma didn't care. She wanted to celebrate. The family had gathered, her mother, her stepfather, Laura, and Laura's teenage son Kyle. Kyle was 16, tall, restless, and always smirking at everyone like the world owed him something. He had his mother's sharp attitude but none of her restraint. Emma didn't dislike him, but she didn't trust him either. There was something about his tone, the way he spoke down to her, that always left her uneasy. As the family gathered around the dining table, Emma lit the small candles on the cake. "Finally graduated," her mother said proudly. "We're all so proud of you, honey." Emma smiled, feeling her heart swell. It was one of the rare moments she felt seen, truly seen. But before she could even take the first slice, Kyle leaned back in his chair, his voice cutting through the warmth in the room. "It's just a degree," he said, his tone mocking. "It's not like you cured cancer or something." The room went silent. Laura laughed softly, trying to play it off. "Kyle, don't start," but he didn't stop. "I'm just saying, everyone's acting like this is the biggest thing ever. You went to school, big deal. Everyone does that." Emma clenched her jaw, choosing not to respond. She didn't want to ruin the moment. "Kyle," she said calmly, "this means a lot to me. Maybe one day you'll understand." He shrugged. "Doubt it." Emma turned away, pretending not to hear. She picked up the knife to cut the cake. The frosting glistened under the light, perfect and untouched. But just as she made the first slice, Kyle stood up suddenly. "You want attention so bad?" he said, his voice rising. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed the cake plate and flipped it upside down. The cake hit the floor with a dull splat. Frosting smeared across the tiles. A chunk of blue icing slid under the table leg. Everyone froze. Emma stared at the mess, her hands trembling. Kyle looked at her, a cruel grin forming on his face. "You worked so hard for that? Go ahead. Eat it off the floor." For a second, the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator. Emma's mother gasped, standing up. "Kyle, what is wrong with you?" But Kyle just laughed, backing away as if proud of what he'd done. Emma didn't move. Her throat tightened, her chest heavy with shock and humiliation. This was supposed to be her day. All her struggles, her sacrifices, reduced to nothing in a second. She looked at her sister, waiting for her to say something, to scold him, to defend her. But Laura's face was unreadable. "He's just a kid," Laura said finally, her tone flat. "Don't make it a big deal." Emma blinked, trying to process it. Not a big deal? The cake she spent hours baking, the celebration she had planned, the only day that was truly about her, all of it brushed aside like it meant nothing. Kyle crossed his arms. "What? It was just a joke." Her mother looked furious, but Laura grabbed Kyle's arm, muttering, "Enough. Go wait in the car." He smirked one last time before walking out, not a hint of regret on his face. Emma knelt down slowly, picking up a broken piece of the cake. The frosting stuck to her fingers, cold and sticky. She stared at it, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. Her mother tried to help, but Emma shook her head. "Don't," she whispered. Laura sighed. "Emma, he didn't mean it. He's just going through a phase." "A phase?" Emma said, her voice trembling. "He humiliated me in front of everyone." Laura shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "You know how teenagers are. Don't take it personally." Emma's hands curled into fists. For a moment, she wanted to scream. She wanted to tell Laura everything she'd been holding back for years. How she'd always treated her like an afterthought. How she'd let Kyle grow into a disrespectful, entitled boy. How she'd never once stood up for her. But she didn't. She stood up slowly, wiping her hands on a napkin. "You're right," she said quietly. "It's not a big deal." Laura seemed relieved, not realizing the storm that was forming behind Emma's calm expression. "Good," she said. "Let's just move on." But Emma didn't move on. She excused herself, went upstairs, and closed the door behind her. In the mirror, she saw her reflection, her graduation gown, the one she'd been so proud of, now stained with bits of frosting and crumbs. She laughed softly, but it wasn't out of humor. It was disbelief. Her whole life she had worked for respect. Not praise, not money, just respect. And yet, even at her highest moment, her family found a way to tear it down. Not strangers, her own family. That night she didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment over and over. The laughter, the smashed cake, her sister's dismissive tone. The words echoed in her head. "He's just a kid. Don't make it a big deal." But to Emma, it was a big deal. It was everything. It was the moment she realized that no matter how hard she worked, she would never be respected until she stood up for herself. The anger inside her was quiet, not wild or loud. It was cold and sharp, the kind that didn't fade overnight. The next morning, the house was silent. Her mother knocked on her door softly. "Emma, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady. But she wasn't fine. Something inside her had changed. When she came downstairs, Laura and Kyle were gone. The only sign of last night's chaos was the faint stain on the kitchen floor. Emma stared at it for a long time before picking up a towel and wiping it clean. As the frosting disappeared, she whispered to herself, "This isn't over." It wasn't about the cake anymore. It was about dignity. It was about respect. And for the first time, Emma knew she wasn't going to let anyone walk over her again. She took a deep breath, her hands steady now. She wasn't going to lash out or scream. She was going to think. She was going to act carefully. If Laura wanted to teach her son arrogance, then Emma would teach them both a lesson. Not through anger, but through consequence. As she cleaned the last of the mess, she looked up at her graduation photo on the counter, her smiling face before the disaster. The girl in that picture looked hopeful, innocent. Emma felt different now. She wasn't the same person anymore. Something had awakened inside her. A quiet determination that burned stronger than her anger. She didn't know how yet, but she would make things right. Not by lowering herself to their level, but by showing them who she truly was. For now, she said nothing. She just watched the morning light hit the clean kitchen floor, and for the first time, she smiled. Not out of joy, but out of certainty. They had taken her moment, but they hadn't taken her strength. And soon, they would understand exactly what kind of woman they had underestimated. Days passed, but the memory of that ruined cake never left Emma's mind. Every time she walked into the kitchen, she saw it. The spot on the floor where her nephew had smashed her hard work and laughed about it. The sound of his mocking voice echoed in her head, and worse than that was Laura's calm reaction. "He's just a kid," she had said. Like it meant Emma's feelings didn't matter. That sentence replayed in her thoughts until it started to shape her decisions. At first, Emma tried to move on. She went back to work, smiled when people congratulated her, and told herself that revenge wasn't worth her peace. But at night, when everything was quiet, her anger returned, sharper than before. She had always been the calm one, the forgiving one. But that day had changed something inside her. She wasn't angry just because of a cake. She was angry because for years, her sister had belittled her achievements, made her feel small, and then taught her son to treat her the same way. One evening, as she sat at her desk grading student essays, an email popped up. It was from the district office. They were expanding the academic department, and Laura had applied for an administrative position, one that required a recommendation from someone in the education field. And since Emma had been working there longer, she was the perfect person to provide it. The email asked if she'd be willing to write Laura a reference letter. Emma stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The irony almost made her laugh. Laura, the same sister who told her that her degree was just a piece of paper, now needed her professional support. The same sister who couldn't even defend her on her graduation day wanted her help. She sat back, torn between anger and reason. This was her chance. She could easily destroy Laura's opportunity. One poorly written letter, one quiet warning to the hiring manager, and her sister's chances would be gone. It would be the perfect payback. Clean, subtle, and fair in its own way. But as she opened a blank document, her fingers froze over the keyboard. She imagined the satisfaction she'd feel, the look on Laura's face when she got the rejection email. Yet a small voice whispered inside her, "Is this who you are now?" Emma pushed the thought aside. She remembered Kyle's laughter, her sister's dismissive tone, the cake dripping off the table. They hadn't cared about her feelings, so why should she care about theirs? Still, the hesitation lingered. She was angry, but she wasn't cruel. That was the difference between her and them. She saved the draft without writing anything. Days went by, and the email sat there, waiting for her response. She couldn't decide. It was as if her heart and mind were at war. One side wanting justice, the other craving peace. At work, she became quieter. Her co-workers noticed her distant expression, but no one asked questions. She focused on her students, pouring her energy into helping them reach their goals, but deep down, she was exhausted. The betrayal had cut deeper than she realized. One afternoon, she stopped by her mother's house to drop off some groceries. Her mother greeted her warmly, but as soon as Emma walked in, she saw a photo of Kyle on the wall, smiling, holding a basketball trophy. The sight of him made her chest tighten. "How's Laura?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Her mother sighed. "Tired. Things at home haven't been easy. She's been looking for work, and Kyle's been giving her trouble. He's not a bad boy, just lost." Emma wanted to believe that, but she couldn't forget how he'd humiliated her. "Lost or not," she said quietly, "he's old enough to know respect." Her mother nodded. "I know, but try to understand, Emma. Laura's had a tough few years. You two used to be so close." Emma looked away. They had been close once, before envy and pride got between them. Before Laura decided that success was a competition. Emma still remembered the days they'd share clothes, laugh at old movies, and talk about their dreams. But that bond had vanished somewhere along the way. That night, Emma sat at her laptop again, the recommendation request still waiting. Her finger hovered over the keyboard. She thought about what revenge really meant. Would it fix the past? Or would it make her like them? She opened her messages and scrolled through old texts. Months ago, Laura had sent her a picture of Kyle, proud of his grades. "He's finally improving," she'd written. Emma realized then that even if Laura had hurt her, she was still a mother trying her best. She closed the messages, sighed deeply, and opened the draft again. For a moment, she considered writing the truth. That Laura had poor communication, that she lacked empathy, that she didn't handle conflict well. But instead, she began to type slowly, carefully. She wrote about Laura's strong organizational skills, her reliability, and her experience managing family schedules. It wasn't glowing, but it was honest. She didn't lie and she didn't sabotage. She just told the truth, without bitterness. When she was done, she read it one last time. The anger inside her had dulled. Maybe she was too tired to hate anymore. Maybe she was finally realizing that revenge wouldn't make her feel better. It would just keep her trapped in that moment of pain. The next day, she sent the letter. No hesitation this time. A week later, Laura called. Emma didn't answer at first, expecting another argument. But when the phone rang again, she sighed and picked up. "Emma," Laura said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you. I got the job. They said your recommendation really helped." Her voice wavered. "I didn't think you'd do it after what happened." Emma didn't know what to say. The silence stretched until Laura spoke again. "I'm sorry. About Kyle, about everything. I should have stopped him that day. I don't know what's gotten into him lately." For the first time, Emma heard something new in her sister's voice. Humility. Regret. Maybe even guilt. "It's done," Emma said softly. "I just hope he learns something from it." "He will," Laura said. "And so will I." After they hung up, Emma sat there for a long time, thinking about how easy it would have been to destroy her sister's opportunity. The power had been in her hands, and she'd chosen not to use it. She had expected to feel weak, but instead she felt strong. Stronger than she'd ever felt when she was angry. A few days later, she got a message from Kyle. Just a few words. "I'm sorry. Aunt Emma, I shouldn't have done that." She stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't much, but it was real. People didn't change overnight, but it was a start. She typed back, "Thank you for saying that. I forgive you." That night, as she sat by her window, she thought about how revenge had almost consumed her. It had felt powerful in the beginning, like taking control of her pain, but in the end it wasn't destruction that gave her peace. It was the decision to rise above it. The next morning, she walked into her kitchen, made herself a cup of coffee, and stood by the same spot where her cake had fallen weeks ago. The floor was spotless now, but she still remembered the scene vividly. Only this time the memory didn't sting. It reminded her of how far she'd come. Emma smiled faintly, realizing something she'd never understood before. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about living better, moving on, and proving that no amount of cruelty can break your spirit. She picked up her graduation photo from the counter and looked at her smiling face. It wasn't the cake or the ceremony that made her proud. It was this moment. The moment she learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers quietly, "You're better than this." And for Emma, that was victory enough. The morning sun streamed through Emma's window as she sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen. The cursor blinked on a blank email, one that could change everything. The school district's hiring committee was waiting for her final recommendation regarding Laura's job. It was the last step, and all Emma had to do was press send. But her fingers wouldn't move. The weight of that decision pressed down on her chest like a stone. She had every reason to destroy her sister's chances. After everything Laura and Kyle had done, the humiliation, the laughter, the disrespect, this was her opportunity to even the score. A few words could quietly end Laura's shot at the job, and no one would ever know it was her doing. The thought gave her a strange sense of control. She could finally make Laura feel the way she had felt on her graduation day. Small, powerless, and dismissed. But as Emma's eyes drifted toward the framed picture on her desk, her graduation photo, something inside her shifted. In the picture, she was smiling brightly, holding her diploma, surrounded by her family before things went wrong. That day had been about accomplishment, hard work, and pride. But when she looked at the photo now, all she saw was the pain that followed. The image reminded her how quickly bitterness could stain even the best memories. Emma leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Revenge had felt like justice at first, but now it felt heavy, exhausting. What would she gain by ruining her sister's career? Would it fix the hurt? Would it erase that night? She doubted it. If anything, it would make her feel emptier. Yet forgiving felt impossible too. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from her mother. "Laura's been having a rough week. She's nervous about the interview today. Try to wish her luck." Emma stared at the message for a long time. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Wish her luck, after all the pain she'd caused? But something in her mother's words hit her heart. Maybe her mother knew Emma's struggle. Maybe she was reminding her that grace didn't mean weakness. It meant strength. Emma stood and walked to the window. Outside, children were playing in the park across the street. Their laughter carried in the air, free, untainted. She wondered when she'd last felt that light. She'd spent so long holding on to anger that it had become part of her, like a shadow she couldn't shake. But maybe she was tired of carrying it. She turned back to the laptop. Slowly, she began typing. Her words were careful and honest. She wrote about Laura's skills, her organization, and her experience balancing family and work. She didn't exaggerate and she didn't lie. She just told the truth and the good parts. When she finished, she read it over one last time. It wasn't revenge. It was release. She hovered over the send button, her pulse racing. Then she clicked. The email flew off into the digital world, and with it went the last of her anger. She closed her laptop, exhaled deeply, and for the first time in weeks, her mind felt quiet. No more plans, no more grudges, just silence. 2 days later, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, Laura stood there, looking uncertain. She wasn't wearing her usual confident smile. Instead, she looked almost nervous. "Hey," she said softly. Emma stepped aside to let her in. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. "I got the job," Laura said finally, her voice trembling. "They said your recommendation helped seal it. I didn't expect you to do that, not after what happened." Emma folded her arms. "You didn't think I was capable of kindness?" Laura looked down. "I didn't think I deserved it." Her tone cracked a little. "I've been meaning to call, but I didn't know what to say. That night, I should have stopped Kyle. I should have defended you. I failed you, Emma." The sincerity in her voice caught Emma off guard. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She'd imagined this conversation 100 times, but in all those versions, she was the one with the upper hand, the one demanding an apology. Yet now, standing face to face with her sister, all she felt was relief. "I was angry," Emma said quietly, "for a long time. Not just because of the cake, but because it showed me how little you respected me." Laura nodded, her eyes wet. "You're right. I was jealous of you, Emma. You worked hard, and you made something of yourself. I told myself I didn't care, but I did. And Kyle, he picked up that attitude from me. I'm sorry." The words hit Emma like a soft wave, not painful, but cleansing. Hearing her sister admit her jealousy, her regret, made everything make sense. The laughter, the dismissal, it all came from insecurity, not hate. Behind Laura, a small figure appeared. Kyle stood at the doorway, holding a box of cupcakes. He looked awkward, his usual arrogance gone. "Hi, Aunt Emma," he said quietly. "Mom made me come." Laura gave him a sharp look, but he continued. I wanted to come. I'm sorry for the cake. It was stupid. I thought it was funny, but it wasn't." Emma studied him for a moment. He looked so different from that night. No smirk, no attitude. Just guilt. She could have scolded him, could have told him how deeply his actions had hurt her, but instead she simply said, "Thank you, Kyle. I forgive you." He nodded, relieved, and handed her the cupcakes. "Mom said these aren't a cake, but maybe they're a start." Emma smiled faintly. "They are." The three of them sat together in the living room, awkward at first, then gradually more comfortable. They talked about small things, work, school, life, nothing deep, but it was enough. For the first time in years, Emma saw her sister not as a rival, but as someone flawed and human, just like her. As they left, Laura turned back at the door. "You could have ruined me, Emma, but you didn't. I'll never forget that." Emma smiled softly. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for myself." After they left, Emma walked into the kitchen. The evening sun filtered through the curtains, bathing everything in a warm glow. She placed the cupcakes on the counter, next to her graduation photo. For a long time, she just stood there, thinking about everything that had happened, the anger, the hurt, the choice to forgive. She realized now that revenge would have kept her stuck in that moment forever, but forgiveness had set her free. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it allowed her to move forward without bitterness. She had taken back her power, not by striking back, but by rising above. Weeks later, life felt normal again. Emma threw herself into her work with a new sense of calm. Her students noticed the change. She smiled more, listened more, laughed easily. And when people asked how she stayed so composed, she just said, "I learned that peace is more powerful than payback." One afternoon, she visited her mother. Laura was there too, helping in the garden while Kyle played basketball nearby. They greeted Emma warmly, and she realized that the distance that once existed between them was finally fading. As she helped her mother water the plants, Laura approached her with a gentle smile. "You know," she said, "Kyle talks about you a lot now. Says you're the reason he's trying harder in school." Emma laughed softly. "That's good. Maybe he'll actually graduate before smashing another cake." Laura laughed too, shaking her head. "Never again. I promise." In that moment, everything felt right. Not perfect, but right. The past couldn't be changed, but it had taught them something none of them would forget. That night, as Emma drove home, she thought about how close she'd come to letting anger define her. She realized that real strength wasn't about revenge, it was about control. The ability to face pain and still choose kindness. When she got home, she lit a small candle on the table, a quiet celebration for herself. No crowd, no cake, no photos, just peace. The kind that came when you stopped fighting the world and started understanding it. Looking at the flickering light, she whispered to herself, "You won." Not over them, but over the part of her that once believed revenge was power. Because true power, she knew now, was forgiveness and the courage to let go.